These isles, how they scream. Yorick, shepherd of souls. The last survivor of a long-forgotten religious order, Yorick is both blessed and cursed with power over the dead. Trapped on the Shadow Isles, his only companions are the rotting corpses and shrieking spirits that he gathers to him. Yorick's monstrous actions belie his noble purpose. To free his home from the curse of the ruination. Even as a child, Yorick's life was never normal. Raised in a fishing village at the very edge of the Blessed Isles, he always struggled to find acceptance. While most children his age were playing hide-and-seek, young Yorick was making friends of a different kind. The spirits of the recently deceased. At first, Yorick was terrified of his ability to see and hear the dead. Whenever someone in the village passed away, Yorick would lie awake all night, waiting for the chilling cry of a new visitor. He could not understand why they chose to haunt him, and why his parents believed the spirits to be nothing more than nightmares. In time, he came to realize the souls were not there to harm him. They were simply lost and needed help finding their way to the beyond. Since only Yorick was able to see these spirits, he took it upon himself to be their guide, escorting them to whatever awaited in eternity. The task was bittersweet. Yorick found that he enjoyed the company of ghosts, but each one he brought to rest meant saying farewell to another friend. To the dead, he was a savior, but to the living, he was a pariah. The villagers only saw a disturbed little boy who spoke to people who weren't there. Tales of Yorick's visions soon spread beyond his village, and drew the attention of a small order of monks who dwelled at the heart of the Blessed Isles. Its envoys traveled to Yorick's island, believing he could become an asset to their faith. Yorick agreed to journey to their monastery, and there he learned the ways of the Brethren of the Dusk and the true significance of their trappings. Every monk carried a spade as a symbol of their duty to conduct proper burial rites, which ensured souls would not lose their way. And each brother wore a vial of water drawn from the Blessed Isles' sacred spring. These tears of life represented the monk's duty to heal the living. Yet, no matter how he tried, Yorick could never gain the acceptance of the other monks. To them, he was tangible proof of things that should only be known through faith. They resented his power to easily perceive what they themselves had struggled their entire lives to understand. Shunned by his brothers, Yorick found himself alone again. One morning, as he tended to his duties in the cemetery, Yorick was interrupted by the sight of a pitch-black cloud roiling across the surface of the Blessed Isles, devouring everything in its path. Yorick tried to run, but the cloud quickly enveloped him and plunged him into shadow. All around Yorick, living things began to writhe and contort, corrupted by the foul magic in the black mist. People, animals, even plants began to transform into vile, ghoulish mockeries of their former selves. Whispers emanated from the turbulent air around him, and his brothers began ripping the vials of healing water from their necks, as if the objects were causing them great anguish. A moment later, Yorick watched in abject horror as the monks' souls were ripped from their bodies, leaving cold, pale corpses corpses behind. Among the quieting screams of his brethren, Yorick alone could hear voices within the mist. "Remove it. Join us. We will become one." He felt his fingers grasping for the vial at his neck. Mustering all his resolve, Yorick forced his hands away from his throat and commanded the howling souls to stop. The black mist writhed violently, and darkness overtook him. When Yorick awoke, the winds had calmed, and the once fertile lands had transformed into the grotesque hellscape of the Shadow Isles. Isolated tendrils of the black mist clung to him, trying to overtake the one living thing not yet corrupted. As the mist wrapped itself around him, Yorick saw it suddenly recoil from the vial at his neck. Yorick clutched the blessed water, realizing it was all that kept him alive. In the days that followed, Yorick scoured the islands for survivors, but found only the twisted remnants of what once lived there. Everywhere he walked, he witnessed wretched spirits rising from the bodies of the dead. As he searched, Yorick slowly pieced together the events that led to the cataclysm. A king had arrived seeking to resurrect his queen, but instead had doomed the isles and everything on them. Yorick wished to find this ruined king and undo the curse he had unleashed, but he felt powerless in the face of the seemingly endless death that surrounded him. Almost lost within his grief, Yorick began to speak to the spirits around him, attempting to find solace with them as he had as a child. Instead, as he communed with the mist, corpses left their graves, guided by his voice. He realized the bodies he once laid to rest were now his to command. A glimmer of hope shone from the heart of his despair. To free the dead of the Shadow Isles, Yorick would wield their power and their strength. In order to end the curse, he would be forced to use it. Last rites. "Help me," begged the shipwrecked man. Yorick couldn't say how long the survivor had been lying there, bones broken, bleeding into what remained of his wrecked sailing vessel. He had been moaning loudly, but his cries were drowned out by the multitude of wailing souls that haunted the isle. A maelstrom of spirits gathered around him, drawn to his flickering life force like a beacon, hungry to reap a fresh soul. The man's eyes widened in horror. He was right to be scared. Yorick had seen what happened to lost spirits taken by the black mist, and this was warm flesh, a rarity in the Shadow Isles. It had been how long? 100 years since Yorick had seen a living being. He could feel the mist on his back quivering, eager to wrap this stranger in its cold embrace. But the sight of the man stirred something in Yorick he had long forgotten, and whatever it was would not allow him to surrender this life. The burly monk heaved the damaged man onto his shoulders and carried him back up the hill to his old monastery. Yorick studied the face of the injured man as he groaned in agonized protest with each step the monk took. "Why did you come here, live one? onto a massive stone table and began to check his vitals. Most of the man's ribs were shattered, and one of his lungs had collapsed. "Why do you waste your time?" asked a chorus of voices, speaking in unison from the mist on Yorick's back. Yorick remained silent. He left the table and made his way to a heavy door in the rear of the infirmary. The door resisted as he pushed, his hand doing little but leaving a print in the thick layer of dust. He pressed his shoulder against the wood and heaved his entire weight into it. "So much effort for naught," sneered the mist. "Let us have him." Again, Yorick answered it with contemptuous silence as he finally forced the door open. The heavy oak dragged across the stone tiles of the monastery floor, revealing a chamber full of scrolls, herbs, and poultices. For a moment, Yorick stared at the artifacts of his former life, struggling to remember how to use them. He picked up a few that looked familiar. Bandages, yellow and brittle with age, and some ointment that had long turned to crust, and returned to the man atop the stone table. "Just leave him," said the mist. "He was ours the moment he came ashore." "Quiet," snapped Yorick. The man on the table was now gasping for breath. Knowing he had little time to save him, Yorick tried to bind his wounds, but the rotten bandages fell apart as quickly as he could apply them. As his breath grew more ragged, the man convulsed. He grabbed the monk's arm in agonized desperation. Yorick knew there was only one thing that could save the man's life. He uncorked the crystal vial at his neck and considered the life-giving water it contained. There was precious little left. Yorick was unsure if it was enough to save the man, and even if it did, Yorick was forced to face the truth. In trying to save the man, he was just chasing the memory of his former life, when this cursed place was called the Blessed Isles. The souls in the mist had taunted him, but they taunted him with the truth. This man was doomed, and if Yorick used the tears of life, he would be too. He closed the vial and let it rest against his neck. Stepping back from the table, Yorick watched the man's chest rise and fall one last time. The black mist filled the room, spirits clawing out from it in anticipation. The mist shivered eagerly, then ripped the dead man's soul from his body. It uttered a faint, feeble cry before it was devoured by its new host. Yorick stood motionless in the room and uttered a barely remembered prayer. He looked at the soulless husk on the table, a bitter reminder of the task he had yet to complete. While the curse of the ruination remained, anyone who came to these isles would suffer the same fate. He had to bring peace to these cursed islands. But after years of searching, all he had found were whispers about a ruined king. He needed answers. With a single motion of Yorick's hand, a thin strand of mist poured into the man's body. A moment later, it rose from the table, barely sentient. But it could see, it could hear, and it could walk. "Help me," said Yorick. The body shambled out the door of the infirmary, its sloughing footsteps echoing through the halls of the monastery. corpse trudged toward the center of the isles until it disappeared into the mist. Perhaps this one would return with the answer. Hecarim, the shadow of war, born into an empire long since gone to dust and forgotten. Hecarim was a lieutenant of the Iron Order, a brotherhood sworn to defend their king's lands. As Hecarim won victory after victory from the back of his mighty warhorse, the commander of the Iron Order saw in him a potential successor, but also a growing darkness. His obsessive hunger for glory was eroding his honor, and over time the Knight Commander came to realize this young lieutenant must never lead them. When he was told this, Hecarim was furious. Even so, he bit back his anger and continued in his duties. When they next rode to war, the commander found himself surrounded by enemies and cut off from his fellow knights. Hecarim, seeing his chance, turned away and left him to die. At battle's end, the Iron Order, oblivious to what Hecarim had done, knelt on the bloody ground and swore allegiance to him. Hecarim rode to the capital to take his formal oaths and met with Kalista, the king's most trusted general. She recognized his prowess and leadership, and when the queen was wounded by an assassin's poisoned blade, Kalista was comforted to know the Iron Order would remain with the king while she sought a cure. Gripped by paranoia and seeing new threats in every shadow, the king raged at those he believed were trying to separate him from his dying wife, and dispatched Hecarim to quell dissent throughout the kingdom. The Iron Order earned a dreadful reputation as ruthless enforcers of the king's will. Towns and villages burned. Hundreds were put to the sword. With grim inevitability, when the queen died, Hecarim chose to sour the king's grief into hatred, seeking sanction to lead the Iron Order into foreign lands. He would avenge her death while earning yet more dark renown for himself. But before they could ride out, Kalista returned. She had found what she sought upon the distant Blessed Isles, and yet it was now too late. The king would not believe this, and had Kalista imprisoned as a traitor. Intrigued by what he had heard, Hecarim visited her cell, and they spoke of the pale mists that protected the islands from all invaders, and also of the inhabitants' immense wealth, including the legendary waters of life. Knowing only Kalista could lead them there, Hecarim eventually persuaded her to guide the king's fleet through the veil that concealed the Blessed Isles from mortal sight. They landed at the city of Helia with the queen's body in solemn procession. The Iron Order led the way, only to be met by the city's masters, who now refused to help. Enraged, the king ordered Kalista to kill them, but she refused, and Hecarim smiled as he made the decision that would damn him for eternity. He drove a spear through Kalista's back and ordered his knights to ransack the city, looting its vaults of arcane treasures. Amid the chaos, a lowly custodian agreed to grant the king access to the waters of life. But not even this could distract Hecarim from the revelry of bloodshed, and so it was that the ruination of the Blessed Isles would take him almost completely by surprise. A blast wave of magical force tore across Helia, shattering every last building and leaving the fragments suspended in searing unlight. In its wake came the black mist, a billowing hurricane that dragged every living creature it touched into its shrieking, roiling embrace. Hecarim tried to rally the Iron Order, hoping to make it back to their ships, but the mist claimed them one by one as they fled. Alone and defiant to the end, the Knight Commander was taken by the shadows. He and his mighty steed were fused into a monstrous, spectral abomination that reflected the darkness in Hecarim's heart, a brazen creature of fury and spite, at one with the black mist and yet utterly enslaved by it. Bound forevermore to these shadow isles, Hecarim has spent centuries in a sinister mockery of his former life, cursed to patrol the nightmarish lands he once intended to conquer. Whenever the black mist reaches out beyond their shores, he and the otherworldly host of the Iron Order ride out to slaughter the living in memory of glories long past. No one lives. Icy waves crashed on the bleak shore, red with the blood of the men Hecarim had already butchered. The mortals he had yet to kill were retreating over the beach in terror. Black rain doused them, and storm clouds boiled in from the morning heart of the island. He heard them shouting to one another. The words were a guttural battle chant he did not recognize, but the meaning was clear. They actually thought they might live to reach their ship. True, they had some skill. They moved as one, wooden shields interlocked. But they were mortal, and Hecarim savored the meat stink of their fear. He circled them, threading crumbling ruins and unseen, in the shadowed mist rising from the ashen sand. The echoing thunder of his hooves struck sparks from black rocks. It gnawed at their courage. He watched the mortals through the slitted visor of his helm. The weak light of their wretched spirits was flickering corpuscent in their flesh. It repulsed him even as he craved it. "No one lives," he said. His voice was muffled by the dread iron of his helm, like the corpse rasp of a hanged man. The sound scraped along their nerves like rusted blades. He drank in their terror and grinned as one man threw down his shield and ran for the ship in desperation. He bellowed as he galloped from the weed-choked ruins, lowering his hooked glaive and feeling the old thrill of the charge. A memory flickered, riding at the head of a silver host, winning glory and honor. The memory faded as the man reached the dark surf of cold breakers and looked over his shoulder. "Please, no," he cried. Hecarim split him from collarbone to pelvis in one thunderous blow. His ebon-bladed glaive pulsed as it bathed in blood. The fragile wisp of the man's spirit sought to fly free, but the mist's hunger would not be cheated. Hecarim watched as the soul was twisted into a dark reflection of the man's life. Hecarim drew the power of the island to him, and the bloody surf churned with motion as a host of dark knights, wreathed in shimmering light, rose from the water. Sealed within archaic plates of ghostly iron, they drew black swords that glimmered with dark radiance. He should know these men. They had served him once and served him still, but he had no memory of them. he turned back towards the mortals on the beach. He parted the mists, reveling in their terror as they saw him clearly for the first time. His colossal form was a nightmarish hybrid of man and horse, a chimeric juggernaut of brazen iron. The plates of his body were dark and stamped with etchings whose meanings he only vaguely recalled. Balefire smoldered behind his visor, the spirit within cold and dead, yet hatefully vital. Hecarim reared as forking traceries of lightning split the sky. He lowered his glaive and led his knights in the charge, throwing up giant clumps of blood-sodden sand and bone fragments as he went. The mortals screamed and brought up their shields, but the ghost knight's charge was unstoppable. Hecarim struck first, as was his right as their master, and the thunderous impact splintered the shield wall wide open. Men were trampled to bloody gruel beneath his iron-shod bulk. His glaive struck out left and right, killing with every strike. The ghost knights crushed all before them, slaughtering the living in a fury of thrashing hooves, stabbing lances and chopping blades. Bones cracked and blood sprayed as mortal spirits fled broken bodies, already trapped between life and death by the fell magic of the ruined king. The spirits of the dead circled Hecarim, beholden to him as their killer, and he reveled in the surging joy of battle. He ignored the wailing spirits. He had no interest in enslaving them. Leave such petty cruelties to the chain warden. All Hecarim cared for was killing. Kalista, the spear of vengeance. In life, Kalista was a proud general, niece to the king of an empire that none now recall. She lived by a strict code of honor, serving the throne with utmost loyalty. The king had many enemies, and when they sent an assassin to slay him, it was Kalista's vigilance that averted disaster. But in saving the king, she damned the one he loved most. The assassin's deflected blade was envenomed and sliced the arm of the queen. The greatest priests and surgeons were summoned, but none could draw the poison from her body. Racked with grief, the king dispatched Kalista in search of a cure. With Hecarim of the Iron Order taking her place at his side, Kalista traveled far, consulting learned scholars, hermits, and mystics, but to no avail. Finally, she learned of a place protected from the outside world by shimmering pale mists, whose inhabitants were rumored to know the secrets of eternal life. She set sail on one last voyage of hope to the almost legendary Blessed Isles, the guardians of the capital city. Helios saw the purity of Kalista's intent and parted the mists to allow her safe passage. She begged them to heal the queen, and after much consideration, the masters of the city agreed. Time was of the essence. While the queen yet breathed, there was hope for her in the fabled waters of life. Kalista was given a talisman that would allow her to return to Helia unaided, but was warned against sharing this knowledge with any other. However, by the time Kalista reached the shores of her homeland, the queen was already dead. The king had descended into madness, locking himself in his tower with the queen's festering corpse. When he learned of Kalista's return, he demanded to know what she had found. With a heavy heart, for she had never before failed him, she admitted that the cure she had found would be of no use. The king would not believe this and condemned Kalista as a traitor to the crown. It was Hecarim who persuaded her to lead them to the Blessed Isles, where her uncle could hear the truth of it from the masters themselves. Then perhaps he would find peace, even if only in accepting that the queen was gone and allowing her to be laid to rest. Hesitantly, Kalista agreed, and so the king set out with a flotilla of his fastest ships and cried out in joy as the glittering city of Helia was revealed to him. However, they were met by the stern masters, who would not allow them to pass. Death, they insisted, was final. To cheat it would be to break the natural order of the world. The king flew into a fevered rage and commanded Kalista to slay any who opposed them. She refused and called on Hecarim to stand with her. But instead, he drove his spear through her armored back. The Iron Order joined him in this treachery, piercing Kalista's body 12 times more as she fell. A brutal melee erupted, with those devoted to Kalista fighting desperately against Hecarim's knights. But their numbers were too few. As Kalista's life faded, and she watched her warriors die, swearing vengeance with her final breath. When next Kalista opened her eyes, they were filled with the dark power of unnatural magic. She had no idea what had transpired, but the city of Helia had been transformed into a twisted mockery of its former beauty. Indeed, the entirety of the Blessed Isles was now a place of shadow and darkness, filled with howling spirits, trapped for all eternity in the nightmare of undeath. Though she tried to cling to those fragmented memories of Hecarim's monstrous betrayal, they have slowly faded in all the centuries since, and all that now remains is a thirst for revenge burning in Kalista's ruined chest. She has become a spectre, a figure of macabre folklore, often invoked by those who have suffered similar treacheries. These wretched spirits are subsumed into hers,